Good evening. I'd like to call to order the public reorganization meeting of the Lower Moreland Township School District Board of School Directors. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you for attending this evening's meeting. At this time, I'd like to ask the Board Secretary, Ms. Baker, to take a roll call of the school board directors.
Thank you, Dr. Lee. Okay. Mrs. Baker? Yes. Okay. Mr. Berardi?
Here.
Ms. Blanton?
Here.
Dr. Butler?
Present.
Ms. Cannon?
Here.
Ms. Darian?
Present.
Mr. Geiger?
Present.
Dr. Lee?
Present.
Mr. McKee?
Present.
All board members are present.
Thank you, Ms. Baker. At this time, I'd like to open the floor for nominations for the office of President Pro Tem to conduct this meeting.
John Butler.
I'm not sure because we're up for, I mean, the offices are up for.
Okay, you can't be the. Okay.
How about Mr.
Nominate
Geiger?
Ms. Blanton. Oh, there we go.
Do I have a second for Ms. Blanton?
Second.
Are there any other nominations for temporary president? As there are no further nominations, I will ask for a motion to close nominations. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 All those in favor signify by saying no. That motion carried. I think we forgot to actually do it.
So nominations are closed now. we vote.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Yes. As there is only one nomination, I will hand over the gavel to the temporary president, Ms. Blanton.
Thank you, Dr. Lee. The next order of business is electing the president to a one-year term. May I have nominations for president?
I nominate Dr. Lee.
I nominate Michael Berardi.
Just a point of order, before we do the second nomination, there needs to be a second for the first to move on.
Okay,
Second.
thank you. Are there any other nominations?
I nominate Michael Berardi.
Second.
Okay. And, sorry, I'm just reading my directions. So I think Ms. Baker, you need to do a roll call vote for each nomination.
Okay. Mr. Berardi?
So we can do the roll call, and each member can indicate who they're voting for. We don't need to vote for them separately.
Mr. Berardi?
I vote for Mr. Berardi.
Ms. Blanton?
Dr. Lee?
Dr. Butler?
Dr. Lee.
Ms. Cannon?
Mr. Berardi.
Ms. Darian?
Dr. Lee.
Mr. Geiger?
Dr. Lee.
Dr. Lee, do you vote?
Dr. Lee?
Mr. McKee?
Dr. Lee.
Three votes for Mr. Berardi and 6 votes for Dr. Lee.
Thank you, Mrs. Baker. Doctor, I'm looking at my directions. Now I need to ask for nominations for vice president.
I nominate Dr. Butler.
Is there a second?
Second.
Are there any other nominations?
I'll nominate Ms. Cannon.
Can I have a second?
Second?
Thank you. Let's see. Can I have a motion to close nominations?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed, say no.
Okay, I will now take roll call. Mr. Berardi?
Ms. Cannon.
Ms. Blanton?
Dr. Butler.
Dr. Butler?
Dr. Butler.
Ms. Cannon?
Ms. Cannon.
Mr. Guyer?
Dr. Butler.
Mr. McKee?
Dr. Butler.
Ms. Darian?
Dr. Butler.
Dr. Lee?
Dr. Butler.
Three votes for for Ms. Cannon and 6 for Dr. Butler.
Great. Thank you, Mrs. Baker.
You're
The
welcome.
meeting is adjourned. Do I do this?
Thank you very much. At this time, I'd like to call to order the public meeting of November 3rd, 2024. I'd like to thank the board for attending this meeting of the Lower Moreland Board of School Directors. I'd like to remind our board, as well as members of the public, that this meeting is being live streamed on our district YouTube channel, and that a recording of the meeting will be posted on our school board website within 48 hours. I welcome my fellow board members and members of the public. To our board members, please be reminded that for sound purposes, you must turn on your microphone and speak directly into it for the sound to be audible, both for in-person community members in the auditorium, but also for anyone listening on the live stream. After speaking, please turn off your microphone. We've already taken a roll call of the board. Dr. Best, could you please take a roll call of the cabinet members participating in tonight's meeting?
Mrs. Galdo,
Present.
Dr. Hemrick,
Present.
Mr. Cole,
Present.
Mr. Giordano,
Present.
Mr. McGuinn,
Here.
Dr. Hilt,
Here.
all members present.
All right, thank you. I'd like to move to agenda item number 2, presentations and discussions. We'll start with our student representative to the board.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Adona. I am a junior attending the high school, and today I'm going to give you guys a student climate update of all 4 schools, as well as an update on our progress with the cell phone policy and a little bit of feedback we got from students. School climate update. At Pine Road, students celebrated this week by inviting families to spend an hour in their child's classroom. This was because of American Education Week. Parents and guardians were able to participate in activities, as well as be part of daily routines and academic learning. In addition, 3rd grade student ambassadors showed appreciation for teachers, paraprofessionals, bus drivers, cafeteria staff, building substitutes, and the school custodian by creating signs around the building. The PTA also treated all the staff to pretzels to show their appreciation for all of the teachers. Moore Avenue similarly celebrated American Education Week. They did this by playing a school-wide game of Clue. The students had to solve daily riddles and puzzles while also trying to solve the big mystery of who, where, and with what. In each game, participants work to solve a mystery through clues, much like teachers guide students through the process of discovery, problem-solving, and critical thinking in the classroom. At the middle school, students held their first Spirit Week, which culminated in a pep rally on Friday, November 22nd. At the pep rally, the fall sports teams were recognized for their accomplishments, and certain athletes were also recognized for their excellence. In addition, students and teachers participated in various games, including a relay race, which brought the students and staff together in a fun, entertaining way. Lastly, at the high school, students participated in the 3rd annual Low Motion. Low Motion is an event that takes place for an hour at the end of the school day, in which students are able to choose an activity they enjoy. This event offers students a great way to relax, enjoy time at school with their friends. These activities are available during Low Motion, range from like mini golf, as you can see on the left. There's also some cornhole over there, to like pottery, silent reading. On the right, they're decorating pumpkins with some Mod Podge and flowers. I really like low motion, and it's just a great way, especially after like the first quarter of school, especially can be very stressful. So this was a great way to wind down and just a way to connect with your peers without using your phones, because this was mostly phone-free activities. Mini-thon. So Mia's not here today, but me and I are both captains for Mini-thon. And this year we raised $247,167.39, which is the most we've ever raised. Thank you. Thank you. It's the most we've ever raised, and this was especially special this year because it was Miss Pearson's last year, and we couldn't have done it without her. So, again, $247,000 all to kids with cancer, which is great. Okay, so me and I have been talking about this for the past couple of work sessions, but this past month, we sent out a feedback form for students for the cell phone plan. We sent it out to all the students, and out of the students at the school, almost 400 responded, as well as 45 teachers. We're going to replicate this feedback form at the end of the third quarter to see kind of how students have progressed over the year and how their opinions on the policy change. So I'm just going to show you some of the questions and some of the feedback that we got. This is just straight from the thing. So I feel that not having my phone has helped improve the quality of my learning. These first couple few are just from students. So as you can see, students are mostly indifferent. Yeah, the wide majority of people are just neutral about everything, but for this one you can see that a majority of people who did not say neutral disagreed that their phone has helped them improve the quality of their learning. But still, about 25% of people, 26%, said that it did improve the quality of their learning, which if you think about high schoolers who are very attached to their phones, this is actually a significant amount of people. I think overall the people that you talk to, they're more, maybe they aren't the best judges of their learning because they kind of are biased, they want their phones on them. But when we look at the teacher questions, the teachers have a different opinion on this. Another one for students. I find myself having more conversations with my classmates as a result of the policy. This is one that we see. The green and purple is actually about a little bit bigger or about the same as the people that are red or blue that disagree. This shows that people are actually having more conversations as a result of the cell phone policy. This is definitely something that Mia and I see a lot. When you look in a classroom, as opposed to last year where the 2 minutes before the bell rings, kids are on their phones checking things. Now you see kids talking to each other, more engaged, maybe talking to their teacher, asking them how their weekends were, just much more collaborative in the classroom. The last one, I find myself using my phone more during lunch or outside of school because I can't use it during school. So the purple here strongly agree. You see that students overwhelmingly agree more at this point that are agreeing with this statement than are apathetic about it, that to say that they use their phone more now outside of school. And I think this is just reflective of the fact that students, now that they don't have their phone in school, they kind of need another outlet to use it, which may or may not be like a negative impact of the feedback form of the policy. But I mean, I feel like students, they might just be projecting because they can't use it in school, but yeah. These are some quotes from students taken directly from the forum about what they thought. One student said, I've definitely forgotten more assignments not having my phone because teachers will announce it in between putting my Chromebook away and having my phone, or my Chromebook isn't as easy to quickly pull out as my phone. Another student said, I think the cell phone policy has had more effects socially than anything else. It's nice to be able to see people actually engaged with each other rather than staring at their phones. One student said, at least allow people to have them phones during study hall. People can't listen to music with headphones. You also might be done with all your homework and work, so you have nothing to do. I could be getting things done for other non-school related activities. I use my study hall as a break from all the work, and it helps me during my other classes. This one's interesting because when you look at the feedback form, a lot of students, like more than 50% for the option that was a write-in, they said that they appreciate the cell phone policy, but one change that they would make is offer cell phones during study hall. And they said that because that was the period of the day when they didn't have homework, that was how they kind of relaxed and prepared themselves. Maybe they had other things to do on their phones that weren't able to do on their computers, but they don't have their phones with them. Lastly, a student said, I like the idea of the hotels, but I don't like locking them up because in the case of an emergency, I can't grab it in case I need to contact safety. I kind of agree with this one because back at the beginning of the year at the high school, we had a lot of fire drills. And I don't know, if you have a fire drill and you're leaving the building, like it might be a little unnerving for some students not to have their phones on them for instances like that, especially when it's not a drill. Okay, those are the student responses. Now we go to the teacher feedback. I find that students are more attentive to lessons without their phones on hand. Yeah, so teachers are not mostly apathetic about this. You see that the overwhelming majority of teachers agree that students are more attentive to lessons. So I think this actually speaks, this is, I feel like, a more fair assessment to the effects of the cell phone policy. The phone policy has encouraged conversation and discourse in class. Again, overwhelming majority agree with this statement. Finally, the cell phone policy said positive effects in the classroom setting. I think only one person, everyone but one person, I think, said disagree to this. So again, you can see from the teacher's perspective, the cell phone policy has been overwhelmingly positive. I'm not going to read all of these, but I'll just read. The change in the classroom climate and learning is huge. The students are also much happier and pleasantly very social. So nice to see again. Best thing we have done for school climate and morale. One teacher said that think that the cell phone policy for the classroom setting has been excellent, but maybe this policy should have been modified for study halls. Some students like to listen to music while they work. And you can read the other ones on your own. But yeah, from the teachers, overwhelmingly positive, and they say it's one of the best things we've done for the school in a while. So maybe that's kind of more reflective of the actual effects of the policy than maybe the students who just want to be on their phones. Okay, that's it for today. Any questions?
Did you look into objective data, like comparing students' last year's grades to this year's grades?
No, because like me and I really we can't access that kind of stuff. Maybe I can reach out to Mr. Miles to ask for that's kind of like data. But I think that would also have to be something that we do at the end of the year because I feel like it's too early in the year yet now to tell. Thank you. Anyone else?
45 responses
Yeah.
for the teachers. Were there teachers that didn't respond?
Yeah, definitely. But
a
also
lot,
this went
or-
out because this went out to teachers a little bit later than it did to students because Mr. Miles sent it out to students so we could get more students because this was mainly for the students. So this went out to students Monday at the end of the day before break. And this went out to teachers, I think, Tuesday in the morning. So if they didn't, usually teachers don't check their thing after hours. So
Okay.
if it's like, if they didn't respond to it that morning or that day, then they might not have responded at all.
Okay.
Really interesting. I think the feedback about the study hall is pertinent. Have you given any thought to modifying the policy or for study hall purposes?
I don't have any, but I will and I was thinking of me and I are definitely going to talk to Mr. Miles, especially if we see the same exact things in the third quarter. Maybe for next year, I don't think we can do much this year, but next year, modify it so that during study halls, maybe in certain classrooms, you're allowed to use your phone, but make it so that you can't have your phone in the hallways or maybe things like that. Just adjust it a little bit because there's so many students that even though they agree with the policy that it's helped, they do have this feedback that they would like to use their phones during study halls.
And I think related to that, non-work related communication like email about a job, something that they may find the time to be productive outside of schoolwork, that's something to consider.
Yeah.
Also, are Chromebooks available during study hall? And if so, they're not able to access personal email though, right? Is that correct?
You can use your Chromebook during study hall, but there are a lot of things you can use your personal email, but there are certain sites that if they're not educational, they're blocked on the Chromebook, so you can't really do anything about that.
So things like applications in that season when things
Yeah.
get busy with communications, are they going to be able to access those?
No, not from their Chromebook. You can use your email, but other than that, you can't use if you use text, communicate with your boss over text, or I don't know, there's a lot of things that students can do on their phone or on their personal computer that they can't do on their Chromebook because Chromebooks are school administered, so they have a lot of applications that are blocked.
I don't know, Dr. Hill, does that maybe something that there could be certain firewalls or things that could be adjusted for that?
Yeah, and so the way that school district filters work is they're categorical, so they filter by category. So if something is considered, social media would be considered a friendship category. But when we do get requests for, let's say if someone's applying to the University of Pennsylvania, we do add those to the allow list so that students are able to do that with their school district Chromebooks and school district, and personal email on a school district device. So there's an open line of requests for that. It's just one click. But if it's more entertainment purposes, those would be categorized as entertainment and would be filtered. A lot of that goes back to bandwidth use. If we have, a few hundred students who are streaming Netflix and, there are other students who are trying to engage with content, it makes it more difficult.
Things like the Common App or Naviance.
Yes.
For
Oh, yeah,
students,
those are available.
Any other comments or questions for Adona?
I just wanted to ask about low motion. It's a
Yeah.
great idea.
Yeah.
Will that occur periodically?
I think in the past we've done the motion once a year, as far as I can roll, twice a year. Okay, twice a year, and I think it's first quarter and third quarter. I thought it was really fun. I did card games with my teachers. I thought it was fun. That's Miss Pearson's over there, the one with the pumpkins. A lot of people like that one. Yeah.
Follow-up question. Do you have an idea, since you had said that you personally agree with the student that made the comment, that in the case of emergency, it's locked up, you can't access your phone?
Yeah.
Do you have a suggestion?
So the way they
for
do it,
change?
a lot of teachers, the way they do it is once you put your phone on the thing, they put it into a cabinet and they lock it. Because I think there were studies that came out that if your phone's out of sight, you're less tempted to like think about it or you're less distracted to use it. And like I understand where that's coming from, but on the other hand, if it's locked away and there is like an emergency that you need to contact someone, like in the case of a real fire, like personally I would feel more comfortable if I had my phone on me, because if I go outside and there's a fire, like I want to text my mom like, hey, there's a fire, we need to evacuate. But I think a way to solve that would just be to not lock the phones up, to just leave them in the phone hotels away from the students, but just on the counters, so that if there was an emergency, then you would be able to grab them.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there's a way to put the phone away, not lock the cabinet?
Yeah, not lock the cabinet.
Okay. Sounds like a good idea.
I just want to say Ms. Pearson missed her round of applause for Minithon, so I'm going to do it again.
Okay, any other questions? No? Okay,
Great,
thanks.
thank you very much. Item B is our 2023-2024 audit presentation by Mr. Gregory Schenk.
Thank you, everyone. My name is Greg Schenk. I am the partner in charge of the audit. And just to give you an update on status, at this point, we have given you a draft for review and approval. And I've prepared a summarized presentation that I will be reviewing tonight. And we are in the process of completing the final audit, which should come out soon. If we look at the presentation here and go to the first page or the agenda, okay, essentially we'll be providing you with, we're going to go over the auditing standards and SAS 114, review the financials, and summarize data. So if you could turn to the next. So one of the purposes of the audit, remember, is to provide an opinion on your financials. So the financial statement is the district's financial. What we are doing is auditing to provide an opinion that you have complied with generally accepted accounting principles, as well as the standards under GASB, the Government Accounting Standards Board, because you do present on those standards. So we have an opinion within this audit on the financial statements as a whole. Another audit that you're required to get, because of the amount of federal funds that you get, is a single audit. A single audit is a specific audit that is more towards the federal financial assistance schedule, and we select programs to audit based on that. In this particular year, IDEA was selected, and that's alternated. The audit opinion is a clean or unmodified opinion. So, which means that you have presented, in our opinion, everything in compliance with U.S. generally accepted accounting standards as well as GASB. GASBs, there wasn't any really major new GASBs. Each year there can be many changes throughout the accounting pronouncements. More recently, the two within the last 2 years that you have implemented is the lease standard, where leases are booked as obligations and right-of-use assets, as well as subscription-based assets and liabilities. So you implemented those in years past, and of course, they're updated within the current status, but no significant new GASBs for this particular fiscal year. We will provide, as a result of the audit, the 114 letter to the board, which is basically describing auditing standards and, providing a reasonable assurance under auditing standards. In our opinion, we are not issuing a 115, which this means is 115 would be if we identified any deficiencies, and we did not. The books were well adjusted, everything was well adjusted, and minimal adjustments had to be made, what I would call standard adjustments that we would always make. And the books were well adjusted, which is good because it means that the board is looking at financial information throughout the year that isn't drastically changed when the audit comes around. So we had a clean opinion and issuing no deficiencies with respect to that, and a clean audit opinion on the single audit, the federal. There was no findings in that as well. When we get to the financial data now, this is a comparison, high level, at a, we can see the various years. So when we look at, the first thing we're looking at is the government-wide statements. The government-wide statements are a full accrual basis, much like in the for-profit world where you're capitalizing the fixed assets and you're showing the debt. That is very different than the government fund basis, which is also in here, which is more a depiction of the budget, revenues, expenses on a standard of resources in, resources out. If we look at the government-wide statements, we can see that cash and investments dropped about $20 million, which was planned and is essentially part of the capital costs that were sitting in cash in the capital reserves that were spended down on the new facility, which was planned. Capital assets, we can see here, went from 89 to 101. Essentially what that was is at the end of the prior year, June of 23, you had about $45.7 million that was construction in progress, meaning that it wasn't placed in service. So this year, that $45 million was moved out of construction in progress and put into service, and in addition to about $14 million of additional capital expenditure, obviously primarily related to the new high school. That was the significant capital projects that were placed in service. So when we look at, why did that go up so much, that as a result of the, placing all that in service, and of course, it's netted down by current year depreciation against those assets. When we look at accounts payable and accrued expenses, that's pretty much timing, and you see there it's a relatively steady trend. Debt, there was really no new debt that was issued, and essentially what we're looking at here is, bonds were paid down about $3.4 million, and your pension liability went down about $1.4 million. Net OPEB went up by about $61,000. So you can see all those comparative balances below. Your net position is $35.6 million compared to $35.2 million of deficit. Not unusual in districts at all. We do many school districts, and obviously the change in the implementation back when they required you to put the pension liability. So the pension liabilities have obviously, from a government-wide perspective, caused deficits in the school districts on there. So that's not something that is unusual at all. When we look at your revenues here, program revenues were very consistent, $9.8 million. Property taxes, we went up. Essentially, you've had a 3.86% increase there. Other taxes were pretty much static. Investment earnings went from $895 to $1,294,000, and that was a result of the environment and so forth. The investment environment. Grants were relatively consistent. When we look at instruction costs and instructional student support, you've got a growth of the ESL students, additional teachers, and support, and the special ed costs all increasing in that particular category. We look at the net change, and it was about a $427,000 decrease on the government-wide, okay? I mentioned before that we talk about the government fund. This is more aligned with your budgeting process, and quite frankly, one of the things when you look at bond rating companies and what they really look at, they're very focused on general fund, okay, and on a government fund basis. So when we look at your general fund balance, you have $5 million there, 179, and that is a healthy fund balance, and you have certain amounts committed and reserved, which are in the financial statements. But, you know, certainly still a healthy fund balance. Your net change for the year on the government fund was a 1.9 million deficit, and that was planned within the budgeting process, very close to what was planned. About 1.7 million was planned in the budgeting process to utilize that, you know, the reserves and fund balance to fund current year operations. So very much in line with what was planned and budgeted. When we look at the food service net position, you had about 1.1 million, and the change in net position was about 148,000 positive, which is very customary. You could see if we look at the prior year, you were about 167. So no major changes there. Overall, you know, the management and Mark and his team were very helpful throughout the audit. We encountered no difficulties, and they were very responsive because we make many requests during the audit process. So it's a fully engaged, and management was very good in providing timely information to us and so forth. So overall, the audit went very well.
Thank you, Mr. Shank. Are there any comments or questions?
Mr. Shank, you're with Malley. Right?
Yes.
And Malley's done our audit for many years.
Yes.
You don't do it every year, right? There are different eyes from Malley that look at our books.
Yes, we have teams that do it. And, I'm the partner, but we have day-to-day, you have managers, you have a principal involved. And we do, like the one principal that did more, we now have the manager doing more, and we rotate teams.
Okay.
So, for the most part, we do a lot of school districts. So we do over 20 school districts, which is a lot for, in Pennsylvania, we do quite a bit. But the standards don't necessarily call for rotating. There's actually theories that that's not good to constantly rotate your auditor, because the key is this, is when we look at our testing, it's a risk-based approach. So we may be changing our risk assessments each year to look at new things or areas that we consider risky. The audit standards, particularly a new one that was implemented last year, are really focusing on risk-based auditing standards, and the team is getting together and looking at what's new. Is there a new standard? Do you have a lot of capital projects, new debt obligations? So that's an important element of the planning to determine where we want to place more. So you don't have the exact same audit plan by any means each year.
Okay.
It's done by analysis and planning, that risk-based approach.
Okay. Could you define what this OPEB liability, what is OPEB?
Yeah. Other post-employment benefits and so forth. So that was a standard. First came the pension, which covered your PSERs, and the year after that, you have this the OPEB, which is going to be all your other post-employment benefits that exist that the district has an obligation to fund.
Okay. Last question for me, I'll turn it over to my colleagues. Pension liability seemed to go down significantly from 2021. Is this because of our teachers, our staff that retires, our liability changes based on
Well, yes and no.
Individuals?
So remember that you're part of the entire PSERS program, and you have an allocation in there. So when you look at a liability like this, why does it go down? Yeah. There's so many factors that are in this, okay? You have Number one, how did the investments return, okay? Number two, actuarial determined life expectancies and or benefits and so forth. There's so much information that is culminated in this. And if you look more in detail at the footnotes, there's significant amount of detail on the componentization of the pension liability and what's changing. And the footnotes have about, many pages on that within the financial statement. And that gives you a little bit more definitive answer on, what's changing and so forth. But, we get a report that is, from PESers that shows the obligations, but it can be many factors that are causing that to go up and down.
Okay. Is that definition in this draft?
Yes.
That you included?
Yes. So if you look at your footnotes, Note J, which starts on page 45.
Okay. All right, I'll check this out later.
Yeah, there's a lot, but it starts on page 45, and it goes through.
Oh, my God.
Page 51, and it will go through the plan, and then you could see all of the changes in net pension obligations and differences between, changing as assumptions and net differences between actual and projected, and it kind of will show you, what's changing and the parameters that are all causing the overall reduction in liability. And so basically, we're seeing this reduction this year amongst school districts.
Oh,
Yeah,
across the board.
yeah, because,
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Shank, thank you for the presentation.
I have one quick question.
Sorry.
And it might be a
ahead.
Mr. McGuinn question. In looking at expenses, student transportation was the one outlier in terms of percentage. It went up 25%. Is that something we expected? Or is that something that?
It revolved around special education, transportation, as specifically our subsidy deduction as it relates to what PDE takes for our IU subsidy. And essentially, if you look at the previous, look at 2022, you see 3.5. Right. Then the next year, you see 3.3. It should not have gone down. It should have gone up. Right. PDE messed up in 2023. They corrected, much to my chagrin, in 2024. What we've been doing as much as we can, working with Mr. Giordano and his team, is to try to take a lot of the transportation costs away from the IU and place that with our alternate carrier. First Alt provides very good transportation, much cheaper. I will say we will continue with the IU for our in-district special needs transportation. We have 2 vans that cover all 4 schools, and they do a terrific job. And I would never, ever want to move off of them because that is the niche. It's with Bucksmont Transportation, so they really know how to handle our special needs students. And we've gotten great feedback from parents. And for that, that one's definitely well worth the cost on that. But yes, that is an anomaly, and I've paid particular attention and argued all the way, in fact, at the PASBO conference with the comptroller on why that happened. And essentially, it was to make up for the year before. So do I see that happening moving forward? I'm trying to trend down as much as we can. Transportation costs, but we all know we're subject to whoever comes to our front door, and sometimes we need to provide those high-cost transportations.
And again, I bring it up as the difficulty of budgeting when you have those anomalies.
I have a question. You referenced the OPED. Can you give an example of one of those items?
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, Mrs. Baker, and I'll
Okay, go.
tag team with Greg. I will say, as a golfer, I can't say Greg's last name because if anyone's a golfer, you just can't say that name. So, other post-employment benefits. So we actually get an actuarial report done based on a census that we provide of everyone on our health care plan. And basically, this actuarial firm projects out what your future liability of health care costs will be based on the gender of your staff, the age of your staff, what plan they select. That is the biggest part of other post-employment benefits, and it's, again, it is done through an actuarial firm. We are contracted through the IU with one firm that provides a very good price for that, and I'll defer to Mr.
No, that's
Mr.
a good
Gregg.
depiction of that. Yeah, so basically when you look at your pension liability and OPEB, there is essentially a separate actuarial study report that's done, and that is encompassed within your financial statements. So you're getting an expert to look at all of those items, and develop that liability, and then that liability is encompassed in your statement, and, that's where that is. Obviously, PSERS is municipalities get their own separate, but PSERS gives you the pension liability.
So how does that affect PSERS? Is that down the road cost coming out of PSERS? Or is it just?
It's really kind of separate. It's to the extent that those are strict pension liabilities, and this has all other liabilities other than direct pension.
So could you give me an example of just one? I'm just having a hard time.
A lot of it is insurance-based or,
Okay.
of things, of other benefits like that.
So even if they're no longer working for the district, you still pay that? Or is while they're in the district,
While they're
you
in the
statistically are paying for them?
Yes, statistically, yes.
Yeah, it's projecting what your current employees would potentially cost down the road.
Correct.
Thank you.
Yep. That's a harder one with districts than it is in other municipalities where they have a real funded liability and so forth. So, but when they put that standard in, obviously it swept all governments involved, and districts were one of them.
Thank you.
Yep.
Mr. Shank, two general questions. You mentioned we don't have any deficiencies. Can you just, for our education, tell us what are some of the common deficiencies that school districts are guilty of? And my second question is, you mentioned the general fund balance as I interpreted, related to bond or borrowing capability or bond ratings. Is that
Yes.
true? So is it the absolute number in
don't
that fund,
think
or is it the stability of that fund over years?
I think it's both what you just said. I think when you're looking at a bond rating company, I think they're going to look at stability. I think they're going to look at the amount. But I agree. Yeah, if it went dip down for a small time below even what they would like to see, they're going to look at trend analysis and so forth. And to me, there's even bigger pictures. Do you look at, is there any other funds that are reliant or anything else going on in the district besides general fund that you could cause them to have to access, that. So, but I think that it's both components are important. Trend. So if we look at trend here, you've maintained a healthy fund balance. And I'm not seeing any numbers. There used to be, the GFOA used to put out standards of the 8% of, expenditures and all that. But they're not really even stipulating that anymore. But this would be considered a healthy fund balance and a healthy trend. Particularly when we look at your budgeting. Now, it's hard, as you pointed out. You have one expense that went up a lot, but you had other things to offset it. But when you look at where you guys were planning about a 1.7, you actually came very close to what that was anticipated at.
And then my first question about common deficiencies.
Yes. So when you have deficiencies, some of those can be twofold, okay? So some of them can be related to your internal controls or financial statements. And then also remember, as I indicated, we're doing a single audit on federal programs, okay? So one common deficiency could be that there's a lot of audit adjustments that have to be made. So we come in and the books are not well adjusted, and we're making significant audit to correct this, or we look at something in cash reconciliations weren't done timely. Subledgers didn't agree to the records. For example, your AP or AR. The district didn't maintain a correct federal financial assistance schedule. If you look in the back of the financials, there is a significant schedule of, federal funds. And if you do that, we have to look at, all those have to be based on expenditures, and your accruals for booking the revenue will based on that. And the district puts those, so if we see a lot of problems there or missing grants that we found during our audit that weren't on the schedule that the client provided, those are types of deficiencies. I can go on and on, but those are some of the, just to give you some perspective.
Great, thank you very much. Well, thank you, Mr. Shank, for your presentation.
Thank you.
Thanks, Greg. For the board's knowledge, we're planning to have the financial statements ready for our public meeting for the board to approve. The financial statements, the audited statements, once they're approved, then we'll go ahead and post those statements to the website as we've done every year. So.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. That'll bring us to our next item, C, a 2023-2024 assessment data presentation by Dr. Heinrich.
Hi, good evening. I am happy to be here with you tonight to talk about some assessment data from last year. I only have 753 slides, so we should be done in no time. I actually was watching Adona and thinking, she's really good. I should have kept her here with me, and she could have talked about her experience. So tonight we're going to be looking at long-term assessment data, annual summative data, PSSAs, Keystones, and then APs, ACTs, and SATs. We have a lot to celebrate, and we have some areas of work to do as well. And I actually think, I was listening to the previous comments about the increases in special ed spending, the increases in changing demographics here. And so those are opportunities for improvement. And I feel really excited about not only how committed our teachers and our staff are to continual growth, but just the work of the district. So much of this ties into the strategic plan with the idea of increasing academic rigor and at the same time providing everyone with support that they need to achieve, to the idea of equity and everyone having access to high-level rigorous education, and so on. So I think you'll see some of those themes as we go through, and I will try not to slide you to death. All right, so we'll start with PSSAs, which all 3rd through 8th grade students take in English and language arts and in math. They take science in 4th and 8th grade up until last year, but this year, with new STEEL standards, the test will be piloted in 5th grade. So those poor darling 4th graders who took it last year get to take it again. But I guess there's something to be said for practice. All right, so this is a comparison of all of our students' English language arts proficiency ratings as compared to the state, but more importantly, the county. And so there's a lot to celebrate on this slide. If you see all of that blue that's taller than all the green and the yellow, those are all wins. We have a little work to do in 3rd grade. 3rd grade has some learning loss that occurred during the pandemic that was already on the radar of the administrative team. We had some great conversations both with Mrs. McMullen and the IST team. Today we spent time with PDE analyzing those results and looking for areas of strength that we can continue and also areas of need. Some of the things that the district is working on are a strong and articulated MTSS program. And I think as we go through this process, I want you to keep that in the back of your mind because that has multiple implications. On one hand, it provides extra support, reteaching, remediation for students who might have gaps as early as possible. On the other hand, it also gives the opportunity for teachers to really enrich and extend. So with all that dark blue that I love, there are still opportunities for some of our highest achieving students to be pushed even further. And as we see that, that's something that we will be able to address more effectively as we add a robust MTSS program. Mathematics proficiency, again, dark blue all the way, well above the state and county levels in all of our grades. We are really proud and excited about that. We actually had the opportunity to visit when these results first came out, particularly the growth ones that we'll look at a little bit. We had the opportunity to visit 21 teachers in the district whose students had scored well above where they were expected and make a big celebration out of that. And that was a lot of fun, from high school all the way down to Pine. So it's wonderful to celebrate all of our hard work. I don't know why I'm holding 47 cards in my hand. Science proficiency as well. This one's really exciting, I think. We are knocking it out of the park in science, and in addition to that, our science teachers, with the support of Julie Dunphy, who's one of our coaches, are really well prepared for the new STEELS standards that are coming. Most of our curriculum is already aligned with STEELS, and so in addition to the fact that we are highly proficient in science already and advanced, it gives us the opportunity to feel really confident that that will continue with the changes that are coming. Grades, so this is the same data but by grade. There's lots of advancement and proficiency in our math. We also are fairly proficient in ELA, but grade 3 ELA is an area of need. One of the nice things that we know is coming is that the ELA curriculum is going to be revisited next year. And so that gives us a chance to make sure that we're well aligned and really building the science, the latest research from the science of reading into our earliest students. Grade 4 math. Grade 4, I'm telling you, they were just so impressive. When you look at almost half of the students are advanced. Blue is advanced, so green is proficient. 82.4% is proficient, but that includes 46% advanced. And fourth grade ELA is really, really, really strong as well. So this is an area of strength for us, and we have noticed that the fourth grade teachers have a really exciting way that they co-plan, and so we are working with Mr. Stroop to help replicate that process for other grades, because we don't need to reinvent the wheel for everything. If we find areas that are strong, we use them as models to continue that in other places. Fourth grade science is just ridiculously good. Fifth grade, super strong, 77% proficient or advanced in ELA, 70.1% proficient or advanced in math. They are well above the state, but also the county percentages, so we're really happy about that. And I apologize if this is broken down too small, but I just wanted you to see particular areas, because in the same vein, as we're looking at 72% proficiency in grade 6 ELA and 64% proficiency in sixth grade math, we're also looking at kids who aren't yet proficient and thinking about what changes do we need to make, what additional supports or interventions do we need to put in place, where can we provide that additional work. We have some tutoring, individual tutoring that's going on. We have, in our elementaries, we have some partner teaching or switch teaching, so that if I'm the math teacher, I can spend a lot of time digging into the math standards and best practices and the new math curriculum. And at the same time, my co-partner can really dig into the ELA and get to know those kids' strengths, because not all kids are strong in both, not all kids are weak in both, but the more time you can spend with data about a particular content area, the more expertise you develop. Grade 7 math, amazing proficiency and nice strengths in our advanced groups as well, and grade 8. So that's PSSA proficiency, that's achievement. Sorry, in grade 8 science. Knocking it out of the park. This is not the same students. This is a 3-year comparison of how we have done different kids, same test over 3 years. So you see that while our 3rd grade language arts is not yet where we want it to be, it is on trending in the right direction. And our 4th grade, 5th grade, 7th, 8th, and overall, we are above each year from the previous year. We do have a little dip in 6th grade English that we're working to provide additional supports for. The fact that they are now in the upper elementary gives us a little bit more flexibility with interventions and interventionists and even scheduling so that we can give them some of the extra supports that they need. Math proficiency is, again, different kids 3 years in a row. We continue to make really nice growth in our mathematics proficiency. And science is tremendous, year after year. All right, so this is not achievement, although it's related to students' achievement, but this is PVAS. This is individual cohorts growth over the year. So if you look at this, obviously, green is right in the middle, and if you see that dotted line, a student who met the expectation based on previous years, they get a projection. If they're right in the middle of that graphic on that dotted line, that means they met the expected growth for that year. The further they get to the right of that dotted line, the more exceptional growth they've had in a year. The further they get to the left of that green line, the less achievement they made in 1 year, or they did less than meet the standard that was expected based on their projections. This is really important because it accounts for everyone. So maybe Julie isn't proficient in 6th grade math, but maybe she was below basic when she took the test in 5th grade math. And through all of her hard work and her teacher's hard work and her tutor and her interventionist, she went from below basic to basic. That would be incredible growth for a student in 1 year. That would push you to the right of the dotted line instead of the left. So in all of our English language arts, all of our students met or exceeded their expected growth for the year. And almost all of them did in math. We did discover an issue with 5th grade math through this data, and one of the things that we talked about is, in some ways, this is really impressive growth, even with the 5th grade, because when you implement a new program, it's very often an adjustment, and students sometimes don't have a little dip in their proficiency or achievement as they adjust. We actually had growth in all of our subjects. Even our 6th graders made appropriate growth in proficiency. I'm sorry, our 5th graders. But they did not make the growth that we would expect from where they were to where they needed to be. So that's an area that the 5th grade team is working on by analyzing the data. The work that we're doing with digging deeper through PDE is really helping them to determine, all right, here's the data you have. Now this data is nice because it tells you what they did last year, but they're also using iReady data and their unit test and their benchmark data because this happened, these PSSAs happened last April. We're into December now. So what does the data tell us about where they are now, and what can we put in place to support them from now until they take this test again in April. And from looking back, I don't think that the growth data has been included in previous years. It's been more achievement data. And I don't love showing you a red, but it's important for us to be transparent, and it's important for us to acknowledge where we're strong and where we need to put in some additional supports for that idea of continuing equity and academic rigor for all of our students. And PSSA science is great. Okay, high school. Everybody take a breath, we're halfway there. The Keystones were the bane of my existence. If I could bring these to my previous position, people would be very thrilled. But we have some areas of excellence and some areas of need. So if we look at Keystone proficiency, when we look at Keystone proficiency, students take the Keystones at the end of a course. So at the end of algebra, which for most of our students is the end of 8th grade, for some it's the end of 9th grade, at the end of biology, and at the end of literature, which here in Lower Moreland High School is 10th grade. But when we report proficiency for Future Ready Index, when the state reports it, they give us the students' proficiency levels in 11th grade. So those scores are banked. If you meet proficiency the first time you take the test, you're done. But if you don't, you get opportunities to have some additional support and retake the test. Your highest score of proficiency by the time you end 11th grade is what gets reported. So these are our class of 2024 grade 11 cohort. So our current seniors, this is how they did by the end of 11th grade. Some of them tested once and some of them tested several times. We are not above the county in literature, but we are in Algebra 1 and biology. So we have some work to do in Algebra 1, but we're still doing it better than a lot of other people that we would compare ourselves to. If we look at literature, this is certainly the area that gives us the most pause. More than half of our students, 66%, 2/3, are proficient. But there are too many students who aren't, and there are not enough students in this data who are advanced. That gives us a very specific area to work on with our students at the high school. And certainly, the literature exam is not an examination of 10th grade content. It's literature, right? So one of the things in analyzing with the high school team is, and this was really surprising to me, but the area that was the lowest for our high school literature students was reading in fiction. Reading for meaning in fiction. And that really surprised me because many students struggle with higher level content in nonfiction. Our kids are getting that. They're likely getting it in all of their content areas. But we really need to focus, and the high school has actually built an achievement goal this year about increasing students' proficiency in reading for meaning in fiction to pull this literature score up. The other thing that they're doing as part of their analysis is identifying areas of strength so they can continue it, but other areas of need. One of the things that is really helpful is for them to work as a group. So we don't have just 10th grade teachers working on our literature issue. We have 9th grade, 10th grade, and 11th grade teachers working on this in literature, because if the 10th grade is where the test is, the 9th and 10th grade teachers can be preparing students very well by making sure they're super standards aligned and they're hitting the areas. We have this data from kids coming up from the middle school. We can be addressing their needs for 2 years before they even take the test. In addition, we need the 11th grade teachers to very clearly understand the assessment anchors and the test standards, because that's when students will retake it. So if you aren't proficient at the end of 10th grade, You go to literature again in 11th grade, and that gives you the opportunity to have additional supports before you retest, with the hopes of meeting proficiency by the end of 11th grade. Same with algebra. And we do have a new math series, but we are above the county. So this has been an area of need across the board, and we are doing the work for sure. Biology is just unbelievable here. I got to celebrate the biology teachers at the high school, and they were very happy that they were at lunch, and I didn't do it in front of their students, but I think their students would have been really excited as well. This is our proficiency over 3 years, so not the same kids, different kids 3 years in a row. And this shows that we have some work to do. And we will. However, and there's our, I'm sorry, before I move on to the however, this is our growth. Again, our literature is not where it needs to be at the high school, and we already have that plan in place to address that. This is first-year test takers, so not the 11th graders, the kids who took it for the first time at the end of algebra or at the end of literature or at the end of biology. So this is really where huge opportunity sits. If you look at the fact that this is the 10th graders, at the end of the test, they had almost 65% proficiency in literature and 70% in biology. Those students who weren't proficient, they get to test again in 11th grade. And I mean, if I said to them, you get to test again, they wouldn't see that as a wonderful reward, but it is, because it allows us to intervene and provide additional supports and better preparation. This one is fascinating to me because the vast majority, when you look at Algebra 1 at the high school and you see all that yellow and red, it might make your hair curl or go straight or stand up. What I think is really interesting, though, is part of this is because we're advanced in math. Because the vast majority of our students take algebra in the middle school, we only have 25 students who took that test in Algebra 1 at Lower Moreland Township High School last year. So it's a really small percentage, and obviously those are the students who need the most additional support. We are talking about adding interventions at the high school, trying to tweak the schedule a little bit, but we're also talking with those teachers about how to use the data that they have to do more flexible grouping and small group instruction, because that's not a typical high school strength or strategy, but it works just as well with 15-year-olds as it does with 10-year-olds. So that's definitely an area of professional development that we've been working on. And again, this is first-time test takers, different than the one we looked at before, which was the student cohort at the end of 11th grade. And this is where you see those low numbers for algebra. Now we get to the good stuff. And, you know, I don't want to minimize the areas that we need to grow, because we do. I also want to recognize that high school students can become frustrated with so much testing, and they're not that willing to work really hard on the test because they love their teacher the way they do in 4th grade. But I think when we look at SATs and ACTs and APs and how many of our students take them and how many of our students are excelling, it does give us another picture of what our students are achieving other than just the keystones. So SATs, class of 2024, their average SAT scores were up in reading and writing, in math, and in total above both. Now, we don't have county data for this, but they're above both the national average and the Pennsylvania state average. That's because because it's a national test, they don't give us county data like that. But that's almost 75% of our graduates, and they're consistently across the board above the average. ACT is a much smaller number. I imagine that you're aware, but in the Northeast, most students take the SAT to apply to college. ACT is kind of a different region of the country. Both, that's how you know you're talking too much. Both of them are valuable, but most schools that our students apply to ask for the SAT, although it's no longer required. ACT is usually reserved for, in this area, for a student who has to demonstrate exceptional skill mastery in a particular subject. So we only had 17 students take, sorry about that, take the ACT, but again, dark blue, dark blue, dark blue, dark blue. It's good stuff. And APs, and just to remind everyone in the audience, we were recognized by the AP for reaching the honor roll, which has its metrics in excellent performance by students. But I think going back to this strategic plan, the other thing that we were recognized for is AP access. And what that really has to do with is students who are in demographic groups that typically have been denied have really strong access to the most rigorous courses here at Lower Moreland, and that's a huge point of pride because that hits every single step of, or every single area or goal of our strategic plan. This is a 5-year score summary. So the last time, this year, 91% of our students scored a 3 or better on their AP exams. We had 249 students, and they took 537 exams. In 2020, 89% of the students scored a 3 or better. Now, that statistic is a little bit skewed because that was the COVID year, and the AP exams were online, but super different than the traditional exams. But if you look, I mean, our high school students, the number of tests is increasing, the average is increasing, the scores are increasing. So, okay, maybe we have a little bit of growth to do in literature and algebra. No, we do. I'm not going to say maybe. I'm not making excuses. We do have growth to make, but we also have students who are very college and career ready, and lots of them. I am going to show you these, but we're not going to talk about every AP exam by subject, because if you love this and you want to dig into it, you have access to it, but it's there. I do want to recognize, though, 48 of our students received AP Scholar recognition, 32 were AP Scholars with honors, and another 41 AP Scholars with distinction. That is a huge point of pride. And one of the things, as a former high school principal and as a teacher, we used to tell our staff all the time, we don't own all of the achievements at the high school. That's a product of what happens in first grade and what happens in third grade and what happens in 7th grade. Just like we don't own all of the areas of need, but we still have the opportunity to put things in place. The nice thing about the MTSS process as we move from IST to MTSS is it will give us a chance to use more frequent data to address needs before the gaps widen. Questions?
I have a few questions.
Okay.
I think our greatest strength and our resources are our teachers.
Yes.
Do we survey our teachers to see, what are their suggestions? Like, where do they think the curriculum is? Like, what do they need?
That's an excellent question, and actually, one of the things that we have our administrative team doing right now is meeting. They're in the process of setting up meetings. We use the Digging Deeper document from PDE, but also some sample questions, and we're sharing them out with our administrators. Your question's so accurate. as a high school biology teacher, not every administrator is going to be able to say, this is what you need. So what we are doing is pulling first for instance, in biology, the biology data for all students who took biology, and looking at it. Where are the trends of strength? What did you, as the teacher group, do to make that happen? Where are the areas of need? How can we support you in doing that differently? And the other question is, and what professional development or support do you need? So we're doing that with every Keystone teacher from 3rd grade to 11th grade.
And also a couple things. When I was looking at the data, I'm looking at the dips. So there's a big dip in the basis for 3rd grade. Does that have anything to do with the curriculum alignment? Because like 3rd grade seems very low, but then they make it to 4th. Is it because they're teaching it in 4th, but maybe they should have been teaching it in 3rd?
So with math or with language arts?
With both.
So with math, we just started a new curriculum, and we are very confident that it's aligned, but it is an adjustment for both the students and the teachers. Do you want to speak to, Mr. Cole feels very passionately about this, so I promised him if a question came up, I would punt.
Sure. So I think specifically we'll start with math because Dr. Henrik was referring to that. So there is a little bit of a dip, and this is something that, we saw these trends, but if you go back to, Dr. Hill, I don't know if you can pull up the math proficiency slide, slide 4.
Don't look at the screen, you'll get nauseous. Further back?
Yep. Oh, a little bit. PSSA mathematics, there you go. So can you go actually to the one that compares it year over year? One more, so we can go to math. So as you can see, one of the things that we did note last year, if you see that 64, not last year, the year before last, 22, 23, we were noticing kind of a downward trend in a lot of our math areas coming out of the pandemic, 3rd grade of note. So we did, in that curriculum process, we heard very loud and clear from our teachers that one of the things that we really wanted to do was to transition away from our last series, which was very much a mastery model, and what we felt was students were not retaining knowledge over the course of their experience in many of our grades at Pine Road at the time, 3rd, 4th, and 5th. Heard that very loud and clear from them, so we ended up going with EM4, which is a spiral curriculum, so that those standards are revisited regularly, still taught to mastery, and there are mastery checkpoints. Traditionally, Dr. Anna and Dr. Henrik had referred to this, traditionally when you implement a new program, for the first couple years, you expect a bit of a dip in performance. And so we very much were bracing for that, but as you can see, actually had a really nice increase in mathematics proficiencies kind of across the grade levels. But in particular, if you look at the 3rd grade math from 22-23 to 3-4, it's a really nice gain there, and if that trend continues, we certainly would see that continue to increase. Another really important thing to note is that the 3rd grade test is notably different specifically in mathematics than the 4th and 5th grade test. So the 3rd grade test is still heavily focused on computation and not as focused on real world application or problem solving. The 3rd grade test, for example, students are not permitted to use a calculator at all on the 3rd grade math test. 4th and 5th, they are permitted to use a calculator, and it is, with the exception, I think it's 4 questions on the 4th and 5th grade test they cannot use a calculator on. So it's a very different test, so it's a little bit hard to compare, apples to oranges. But we definitely did note that trend. If you go back, Dr. Henrik, to the literacy, the language arts proficiency, that is an area that we have noted, and we did really experience some pretty significant concerns coming out of COVID. And while those 3rd grade scores are areas that we want to continue to see growth in, Also, it is very worth noting that they're not third grade scores alone. One of the things that we have done is we have made some adjustments to our curriculum in K-1-2. That started when I was at Pine, and I know Mrs. McMullen is continuing that as well. You may recall last year we talked about it at one of the board meetings where we expanded the use of Haggerty to all of our K-1-2 classrooms, which is really addressing some of those foundational concerns. Another change that's of note was last year. We heard loud and clear from our third grade teachers that in the traditional self-contained model, they were really struggling to really teach the high-level content that was required of reading and math, with being responsible for teaching all 4 subjects. So they really, really sought to return to a departmentalized model where we had an ELA teacher and then a math teacher. So that model shifted last year for the first time, and you see, a modest growth, but growth coming. I do think everybody's very excited for the curriculum renewal process that starts next year, particularly in ELA. Our current product that we utilize is still research-based, still a high-quality product, but it is old, and it served us well through 2 cycles, and I think it's time that we're excited to look at what other options exist that perhaps are a little bit more aligned with kind of where literacy instruction has gone, particularly in those younger grades.
And one more thing, I think that this is accurate, but I think there's been some shifting of teachers, and I don't think that third grade had a cohesive team year after year, and so the third grade team that's in place now is in place for the second time. Prior to that, there were different teachers moving in and out of that team, which can be problematic because when you as an instructor need to master the curriculum, you're not going to do that if you're doing third grade one year and second grade another year. But I think with the split of the elementary, there was some real thought put into who, where, for what, and why. And I think the third grade teachers are really excited to do the same thing for a second year in a row. I mean, I remember as a first year teacher, I think I got to February and I thought, oh, I just need this year to be over so I can start over because I'm going to do this so much better next year. So I think that continuity will be helpful as well.
I have a couple questions, other questions. Now, we do really well in science. Can we look at what's going on in science? Is it more because it's more hands-on? Like, is it more process? And we can apply that to math and to language arts as well.
That's a very good idea, and I will speak with our administrators because when they meet with, if I go back to what you said, when they meet with the science teachers and they have the conversations about why are they so strong here, it could be content. It very easily could be strategies as well that we can move across. And next month we have a meeting scheduled with our Act 48 team to plan our professional development out for next year. And it is strongly my hope that, as you said, from getting feedback from the teachers about what's going well and what they need, we can then, not just resources, provide training to grow their skill sets and their instructional practices. So, because here's the other thing that we're noticing. Yes, we have some kids who need additional support. We also have some kids who really need to be pushed harder, to be enriched and to be accelerated where they're already strong. And so the better we can do at helping teachers to differentiate, which, as a teacher, that's everybody's answer to everything. But if you don't make it usable, practical, and easy enough to be manageable, how much can people really do it?
I have one last question.
Sure.
I'm looking at the writing skills. Is there a tie-in between how we're teaching writing and when it's taught and how it's taught to the trend going into high school? So it seems that do we need some work in writing skills because that's where the literature is coming off? Like I'm looking at, for instance, like in 4th grade when you have the TDAs. Mm-hmm. Are we carrying that over into literature? Because if we're going to do that sequentially,
right,
they should be able to take a piece of literature and analyze it in 4th. They should be able to carry that through.
Correct. And I think that, and I'd have to go back and look at our research from 10 years ago. But in my personal experience, one of the things that I've noticed is students used to be less strong in nonfiction. And so I think a lot of educators, nonfiction, 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 and in some ways, the fiction aspects of literature and even the written responses to literature, I don't want to say they haven't been done, because they have been done, but I think there was less of an emphasis on that when we noticed that students across the board were not as well prepared with nonfiction. I think that you make an accurate point. And yet, when you look at our SAT writing, when you look at our APs, our kids are way up there. So, but a lot of that, all but two, is nonfiction, right? So I think that using well-aligned state standards, using the state rubrics, giving kids released prompts, and really preparing them will be helpful, yes.
Thank you, and I don't mean to put you on the spot. You've inherited a lot of these things, so thank you.
Well, I think your questions are really valid and actually helpful.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Jinx, double jinx.
Right down the row.
So you said that you're noticing some pandemic stuff, and some of the kids are going to need some improvements. What are you noticing as the challenge? Is it language processing? Is it speech? Is it social that's getting in the way of learning? What are you noticing?
I think that when we look at some of the dips, those are consistent across education. I think there have been social areas of need, especially for all kids, but especially for younger kids. But if you look at our high schooler who talked about the cell phones today, I do think we've made a tremendous amount of progress. Those, whatever you want to call it, learning loss, you see that in different areas, and I don't have like a magic wand that I can just fix that, but I think the work that we are doing with our SEL curriculum is really valuable, because if students don't build strong relationships and feel safe, and even safe to learn, safe to take risks, safe to be wrong, I think we have a lot of work coming that has been done already, but I think that's an area of continual improvement. I think that there are some gaps that show up more. I mean, I was a math teacher for a long time. I was also a science teacher and I loved teaching science, because if they didn't learn about the cell last year, they could still learn about volcanoes this year. But if they didn't know their 5th grade math and I was trying to do algebra, you know, it was much more of a challenge. I don't know what all of the solutions are, but I know that standards are changing. We need to formatively assess our kids regularly, and we need to put interventions in place in order to make that happen. I think the district has already done that. It just takes a while to fill those gaps. And also, I'm not under the impression that we have, you know, students who've always been here who all of a sudden we have a higher special ed population. But unfortunately, Lower Moreland is the place to be, because we do a really, really good job. So part of our changing demographics is a testament to our excellence. It's then a challenge as well, but we're well up to that challenge. We just need to talk with teachers about where they're seeing needs and provide them with resources and support and training so that they can adjust.
I'm going to piggyback off of Alex's question for one of mine. So if you look at slide, this one is fine, as an example.
Okay.
So that grade 3 is grade 3 in each of those years, right? It's not measuring.
Correct. So this one, and that's why PVAS, that's why we shared PVAS this year. This shows Julie, who was in grade 3 in 2021. She's in grade 4 in the 2022 one. That other one's a different grade 3. Yes, that's it. And next year, just so you know, I won't use the same colors.
That's okay. So do we have something that measures those students' growth, like specifically the students who might have been, I don't know if most affected by COVID is the way to say it, but like the current 5th graders were in kindergarten at the time, and
So
yeah.
So you see this growth model? This is not about proficiency. The current fifth graders who are in kindergarten, their math growth last year was below what it should have been. Now the fourth graders, their growth was well above. That doesn't mean they were all proficient. It means if they should have made a year's growth in a year's time, those fourth graders, they outkicked their expectation, and they calculate that based on years of testing data that they have. So they have an algorithm that's beyond our comprehension, but if you are here, then you should go here, then you should go here. If you go well below that, that's indicative of you didn't make the growth that was expected, but if you go above it, that's indicative of you did make the growth. What's more, which is why I included this growth, I should say. What's really more important to me, though, today we sat with Mrs. McMullen, and we looked at iReady and unit tests K, 1, 2, 3 in our data warehouse. Now, it's clunky. It's not that easy, but we're working on that because you can see how Julie did in October of kindergarten, and then how she did in January of kindergarten, and then how she did in May of kindergarten. And now that she's in November of second grade or first grade, you could see how she did and how she's growing. That's so much more valuable because that allows you, all right, I have these kids in front of me. This row, they got it. They got it the third time I did it. I'm going to give them something that's an extension or enrichment. But my little bluebirds over here, they're going to come sit with me so that I can help them with this skill that they did not yet master, so that it does, so I don't just move on and then they just get further behind. And actually, Miss Antoni is sitting over there. She is one of the strong members of the IST team at Pine Road, and she's pulling data all of the time. And I don't know how much data we used in the past, but when we're going, Mr. Cole and I meet every month with the principals and work with them on how to have data conversations. We just worked on a protocol today that can help the individual teachers to look at their kids, where are they strong, where are they weak, how they help each other. And to your point, you have to ask the teachers what they need, but also they have to ask each other. So if we can pull the third grade team together and say, all right, here's the third graders, here's where they're super strong and we're doing great, here's where they need a little bit of support. All right, what worked in your room? I'm going to try that. What worked for you with plot? I'm going to try that kind of a thing.
So I guess I would expect that maybe those current fifth graders who started their formalized testing in third grade, like, have you seen a growth in their scores as they've been back to school full time, right? So when they took that third grade test, maybe it wasn't as good because not only were they not in school full time, but it was their first time testing. Then fourth grade got stronger, then fifth grade got stronger for them.
So I have to be honest, I don't know that off the top of my head, but that's a data point that we can pull. And also, I'm sure that that's something that Mr. Stroop and his team are working on for that individual group of kids, but I'm going to...
I mean, you have a lot of data here. I'm not trying to create more.
No,
I was just like
nope.
a curiosity thing.
But if I don't have it, I can get it.
Yeah, Ms. Cannon,
Sorry,
one of the
Ms.
things that
Antoni.
we do, and we showed this to the principals in these meetings, is you can run what's called a cohort comparison report. So essentially what that does is that will track that cohort of kids as they move through the system and kind of give you some of that information that you're asking about.
Yeah, just curious. I have a couple more
Sorry,
questions.
one other point on that. You can also take it down to the individual levels. So you can look at an individual child and see their complete testing history, and you can see projections up to 5 years out. So you can look at a fifth grader and project them out to 8 different AP exams as well as Keystone exams with a fairly strong degree of reliability.
Is that just based on their PSSA performance or based on like assessments that we do as well?
The student level data that I'm speaking of is based on state level testing.
Okay.
That's what's provided by PDE. We can't, on our own local data, create projections like that.
Right, yeah, I understand. So that leads to another question. So when students do opt out, how is that treated in our data? Like, are they subtracted from the total number of students that we have before the percentages are determined? Or are we dinged for that opt-out? I mean,
For
dinged.
parent opt-out?
Yes.
So the only reason parents can opt out is because of religious differences. And so, yes, they don't test. They are counted in the total number.
In what, like as below basic?
No. You have to have a certain percentage of your students test. And so if they don't test, they don't get put in as a percentage, but also then they just have to meet another pathway when they get to the high school. But no, we wouldn't put them in below, the state doesn't put them in below basic. They would be the same as a kid who, for some reason, was in a terrible accident, broke their leg, was in the hospital for a long time and had a medical exemption.
I mean, because for a while, there were a significant amount of children opting out that could have been maybe even like 10% of the grade.
And in many cases, those students would have done tremendously
Yes.
well on the test.
I was just going to say that's where it hurts you is,
Yep.
is you don't get their score when more likely than not they're students who probably would have scored proficient or advanced. When more than 5% of your student body in an entity opt out, that's where you do get dinged. So there's a goal for 95% testing participation for each school. However, as Dr. Hemrick said, we really have no control over that because parents who would like to opt their students out have the religious option to do so.
Yes.
It has become a little bit more work to do that. Like when it first started, it seemed more maybe political and people would just write a letter and say, I'm opting my kid out. Now there's actually an articulated process of the state that they have to follow. So it's not as big of a thing, but yeah.
Okay. So for AP exams, and I'm simply like ignorant on this, is 5 the maximum score?
Yes.
Okay. And then if they get a 3 or higher, then they get credit for the course?
It depends on the college that they're applying to. Some colleges will take a 3 or better. Some colleges want a 4 or better. Sometimes it depends on your major, but 3 is the number that colleges will accept. 2s and 1s, they don't. But not every college will take a 3 for every course. If you want to be an engineer and go to MIT, they're going to make you retake their, but they might take it as an elective credit.
Right.
They're
Okay.
just not going to let you skip their calculus program.
As far as the SAT and the ACT reporting, right, obviously you mentioned in your presentation that the ACT has not taken as much, I think it was 17 students. So are those scores, if they're good or bad for us, are we rewarded or penalized for that?
We are. So in the Future Ready Index, we get points for attendance. We get points for whether the kids take a college level course or an AP course. We get points for proficiency in the Keystones. All of those things go to our overall grading and the niche, I say niche,
Yeah.
but the niche grading as well. They look at that. So yes, we are rewarded for that. Now, ACT's really small, but it's like if the kids take 1, da-da-da-da-da. So yes, that does help us tremendously.
Okay, and that was going to be another thing that I brought up, like the, ranking of the district based on niche or something like that, is not necessarily things that are always within our control.
Correct.
Right,
Correct.
yeah. It's not always an accurate reflection of.
Correct.
One more thing. If in the Keystones, or I'm not sure if the PSSAs are like this as well, if there are different areas that they're reporting, let's just say like algebraic concepts and like data analysis or something. If a student is proficient in one and not the other and has to retake it, can they just retake the part that they didn't pass?
So each Keystone, they don't retake PSSA. I mean, they take it every year.
Right.
But with Keystone, there are 2 modules for each one. If when we took SATs, they called it super score. Like you could take the high, and I think they still can. You could take your highest score from math and your highest score from reading. If in the Keystones, if you're proficient in one module, but not both, you can just take the one module that you were not proficient in,
Okay.
which has happened several years ago and has been really attractive for
Yeah.
kids.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that seems to make sense.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I have a couple of quick ones. I'll try to be brief.
Okay.
One is a commentary on PVOS scores. The higher your proficiency and advanced levels are, the more difficult it is to meet PVOS. And seeing some of our scores in the 80th percentile,
Yes.
et cetera, that may be part of not making PVOS for some students or for some grade levels.
It's an excellent point. Growth is a challenge when you're very high achieving, but we're up for the challenge. We
Right.
can keep working at it.
But it does help
Yes, sir.
to understand that.
Correct.
Also, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but I really do believe we moved so far to nonfiction that it really has cost us in terms of literary analysis, criticism, et cetera. So I think that's a great point in looking at English language arts next year.
Yes.
Have we given any consideration to giving the literature keystone in 11th grade? I know that there's a necessity for remediation and an opportunity, but when you look at our SAT scores and our AP scores, they're outstanding. And it seems, since literature is an end of program, we still are only halfway through a high school program when we test. It just seems to me to be counterintuitive.
I completely understand that, and it makes sense to me from a best chance of doing your best. Here's my concern, though. It only counts up till 11th grade. If we wait till the end of course in 11th grade, there is no opportunity for kids who weren't proficient to go back and retest and be considered in that cohort. And then, because it's a graduation requirement, it forces them into an alternate pathway. Now, a lot of our students could meet that alternate pathway, but some of the students who would struggle initially and need the additional support and need the additional time, they would have a harder time meeting the alternate pathway. I will say this. We will talk about it because I think all things should be considered. But I worry about the kids not having a chance to retest if they miss the test because they happen to be sick or they happen to have some kind of, then they don't even get a chance to be counted. But it's a good
And
thing to
along
think
with
about.
that,
Yeah.
do we still administer PSAT to all students?
All 9th and 10th graders. And so one of the nice things, and I didn't include this here, but we pulled a report the other day and we identified every student at the high school who has a chance. So when you think about, these little areas of growth and need, every student, based on their PSAT scores, who has the 80% or higher likelihood of scoring a 3 or better on the exam, there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of students at Lower Moreland High School who meet that criteria based on their PSAT scores. So yes, we continue to give it to every 9th and 10th grader, and I don't think we've used the AP readiness report before, but it's something that I'm sharing at the next faculty meeting with the high school that I was just working on the counselors with, because I think sometimes we can underestimate kids. And this is a really nice objective piece of data to say, who else belongs in there? Okay, we have 17 kids in AP chemistry. We could easily come up with 25, and all we have to do is look at this data. Now, I also don't want to overload kids. Not everybody needs to take 6 APs, but yes, we do give it to 8. That was a very long answer that should have been yes. I apologize.
And the use of those scores could help us predict Keystone
Absolutely.
results a year out.
Absolutely. Correct.
So,
Correct.
Dr. Henry, can we go back to slide 14? And thanks for entertaining all our questions.
Sure. Which way is 14 from here? This way?
It was the ELA for PSSA. So again, and this is more of a comment, I was struck by how grade 3 is an outlier, and really after grade 4 and onwards, it's pretty consistent. But
Yeah.
at the same time, as you noted, if you look at, say, the green bar in grade 3, they turn into the blue bar in grade 4, so they went from 61 to 79, and 61 to 70 for the yellow bar. So to me, that argues that we're able to get them where they need to be in grade 4, and that's reflected on the growth slide that you have a few slides
So
later.
this is different kids. Is this the one you want to look at?
Right, but if they're in grade 3 in 2022-23, they're green.
I'm
and
on the
in
wrong
grade
slide. That's what
4
I mean. This is not the right
sorry.
slide. That's okay.
Grade 4, slide 14.
Comparison over time.
Yeah.
This is the one we want to look at, right?
So grade 3, green bar, 61% turns into the blue bar in grade 4, right?
Yeah, no. Yeah.
So
yeah.
we're
Yes.
pretty consistently.
Green turns to blue.
Yeah, we're able to get them where they need to be by grade 4. So that, to me, would argue against a more prolonged COVID effect, for instance, right? So, and this, again, this is more of a comment, but I'm glad to hear from Mr. Cole. It sounds like, there's a lot of work being done to look at what the deficiencies may be, and as well as opportunities for growth in K-1-2.
Correct.
Right. I guess a few other questions. Could we see further back before 2021, 2022, grade 3? Could you provide
Yes.
that information? Like, it was
You make me a note.
60% more of a dip, or have we been in the 70s in pre-COVID
think-
age?
Yeah,
We could put that in this week's board report.
Yeah, it's not hard.
And then could we also see the trends in the SAT, ACT scores, performance?
Yep.
And then lastly, when will we be updated on some of your efforts to the board?
Whenever you want.
Thank you.
Now? You're going to sleep here. I'm so glad I got to go before you because no one's going to be listening to you. I'm only kidding. No one listens to me anyway. Well, yeah. I have gone on for a very long time, but I really appreciate the questions, and I'm really excited about the work that we're doing and the work that we'll continue to do. And this is the exact same data that we're going to be looking at comprehensive plan when we make some really specific goals around academic growth and achievement. And so it's nice to have a preview of it and you have access to it before we move to the next steps. If you have other questions, or if you're driving home or waking up tomorrow morning and thinking, gosh, I really wish I had asked for, just email us and we'll share whatever additional information you think might be helpful, okay?
I
Thanks
just want to
all.
make one little comment about the third grade teachers, because I know you said there has been some instability there. My kiddo's in third grade, and the third grade teachers are phenomenal. The entire team is absolutely incredible.
I love that. And honestly, if last year was the first year they were a cohesive unit, they're only going to get better and stronger, for sure. That's great. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
We'll move on to item D, high school project update. I believe Mr. Burgoyne will give us a brief update.
Thank you, Dr. Lee, and Dr. Henrik is a tough act to follow. I will say this. I could see Dr. Best grinning from ear to ear of all the wonderful questions and how engaged the board was. So kudos to the board. Kudos to the board.
The engagement was great. We appreciate it.
In lieu of Mr. Lynch or Ms. Pogley's coming down, because they are still working on trying to get closeout for the high school project, I volunteered to be Mr. Lynch this evening. We've shared this information with you. It's things that we've talked about so far. This is the PennDOT improvement project. If you've had a chance to see the intersections, they are in very good shape. The signals are very, very apparent, much safer. What's still outstanding is when PICO was out to do their gas line movement, they did some work on our sidewalks that they have to come back and restore. PennDOT will not sign off on the final process until PICO comes back out. We're having trouble getting PICO to come back out, but they are working on it. We did get an email today from Mr. David Harmon from PICO. They are in communication with the subcontractor, so hopefully that will be done within the next 2 weeks. So hopefully we'll be able to get that done. There will be a small change order. If you recall, on the turn lane, there was a sanitary sewer line that kind of stuck out that we had to kind of work with the township to kind of straighten out and do some remediation. So we'll be seeing a change order for about almost $9,300, as denoted here. That's coming. We'll hopefully have that for our public meeting. The high school project, again, still working with the general contractor, the mechanical contractor, and the electrical contractor for final closeout. They are now projecting for January for the whole thing to be hopefully complete. They are diligently working on punch list stuff, and they are still, we are still holding these amounts here until those punch lists are done, but they are definitely working on that information. So, and then this is the information for the change order for Morrissey, and then his detail for that. So, and I believe at the bottom is our final, not our final, but our updated spreadsheet, which really hasn't updated much at all, as we really haven't made any payments. And we're still waiting for, again, that change order to come. So does anyone have any questions for the high school project or the intersection project?
So on page 2, the chart that says retainage based on punch list items, are those the anticipated amounts?
Those are amounts that we're still holding
to
be paid to the contractor as part of their original contract.
Oh.
That's not additional. That's what money that we're holding on those contractors until they come back and complete the work. And that's usually about either, depending on how much progress they're making, at times you hold 10%. Now we're holding about 5% down on these contractors. And again, they've been very responsive for items that need to be addressed. One of the items that was outstanding for a long time was the scoreboard in our gym, which is now fully operational. So, and again, each day, if something comes up, we're identifying it and hopefully getting it remediated ASAP.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Quinn? Great, thank you. I think you'll...
I will stay up here
for the budget update.
For our budget presentation or budget update. So as we are endeavoring to start the budget process, in conversations with Dr. Best, one of the things that we have used in the past is referendum exceptions. And there are 4 referendum exceptions, of which I could name 3 off the top of my head to Dr. Butler, and I now have the 4th. So there is an exception for grandfathered debt. That was debt that was incurred before June of 2006, when Act 1 went in. There's electoral debt, which I could not remember. If you go out to your general public for a referendum on incurring debt. Locally, Upper Dublin did a referendum for their new high school. So that qualifies as a referendum exception. The 3rd is for special education expenses, and the 4th is for retirement contributions. So Lower Moreland would not qualify for grandfather debt anymore. Any debt that we had that would have qualified has since been retired. We haven't done a special election for issuance of bonds, so we wouldn't qualify for electoral debt, nor at this point for retirement contributions, simply because the retirement rate over the last 2 years, 2 years ago it went up slightly, last year it actually decreased. So we would not be qualified for that. So we do qualify for special education, or we're projected to qualify for special education expenditures. And essentially, the state will take your 2 years previous, 22-23, versus your 23-24, take a look at those differences in expenditures, and essentially, if those expenditures that they select on this form exceed the Act 1 index, which for next year is 4%, you potentially could qualify for a referendum exception. So, recall that the Act 1 index is 4%. The journey that we would go for the 25-26 budget is one of two ways. One, which we've done for the last 4 years, is in December, adopt the resolution to stay within the Act 1 index. Or, what we've done in the past is apply for a referendum exception or referendum exceptions. That would change our process. There would be nothing done in December. We would need to adopt the preliminary budget in January. And then in June, we would adopt the final budget. A note here, the district does not have to use any of the exception, even if it was approved for that exception. So again, this was shared previously. Blow it up a little bit. But again, taking 22-23 and comparing it to 23-24 and taking that total number increase that's over 4%, we would be projected for a special education exception of a little over $930,000. So keep that in the back of your head. Again, it's taking your total expenditures, they back out gifted, they take some expenditures that are in other line items. If you recall our transportation discussion from earlier, there's where it appears. So what I've done here is shown a history of our recent tax increases. And in 17-18 and in 18-19, we applied for referendum exceptions. So the index is on the left-hand side. What we actually increased was on the right-hand side. In both cases, relatively close for Act 1, and we didn't use all of the exceptions, but over. Since 1920, we've done the resolution to stay within Act 1, and there is our history. So, what potentially could be generated is $933,000, potential new money of over $2.7 million. So instead of a 4%, we could potentially raise 6%. Why is McGuinn standing up here saying this? What did we see in October? We saw a report of a large number of expenditures needed to maintain and upgrade our buildings. We talked previously last year about adding a line item into our general fund budget for our capital projects transfer. If the board is so inclined, we can start to do that. We could try to do that within the Act 1 index. This potentially could give the board the option to go higher than the Act 1 index, potentially just giving the board more options. As I said earlier, you can apply for them, you don't have to use them. It just gives the board a little bit of flexibility, and especially as we sit here on December 3rd, there are a lot of unknowns at this point. We are 6 months away from June. We have no idea what Governor Shapiro is going to be presenting on the state budget. We have no idea how many new kindergarten students we're going to be having. Mr. Giordano has some indication of early intervention students that are coming. Again, flexibility. So what do we do? If we do not seek a referendum exception, we would then, at our next meeting, have to pass a resolution to not exceed the Act 1 index. Or, if we decide to apply, we do nothing in December. I come to you in January, we would pass a preliminary budget with a tax increase that's at best guess at this point, and apply for referendum exceptions. From there, we would continue with the same budget process through February, March, April, May. You know, hopefully paring that budget down to exactly where we want it to be. And again, just giving the board options if you decide to apply or authorize us to apply for the referendum exception. So that is my 6-page handout. certainly open to questions. At the end of the day, I'm going to need to know, do I put a resolution in for next meeting? Or do I put together a preliminary budget for January?
Just one addition to Mr. McGuinn's presentation, along with the facilities improvements that we've seen, we're also heading into negotiations for new CBA that we obviously don't know the outcome yet of that either.
And to clarify, for next month, it would be a vote of the board to say that we will not have a resolution, or is that just a decision we make now, or?
So if the board wants us to stay within Act 1, our very next meeting in December, we need a resolution. So I'm going to need a straw vote on which way we want to go.
Got it.
If we decide not to go to the resolution, by our public meeting in January, we need to pass a preliminary budget. That's the difference. If we do with Act 1 resolution, then we don't really do anything officially until April.
Okay.
To clarify, we wouldn't do a straw vote this evening. We would prepare both options for next meeting.
Correct.
Tonight, we can answer questions about that, but we will give no indication in either direction of which way the board would want to go.
Could you explain a little bit more about how the referendum exception would impact the capital fund transfer planning process that you?
Certainly. So, let me bring this up here. So, what this does is, in this slide, when I say new dollars, this would be dollars that would be generated based on our current assessment and potentially using the Act 1 index and the referendum dollars of $2.7 million of new tax money. Now, that new tax money could be used to fund existing expenditures, new teacher contract, potentially any enrollment increases, new teachers, so on and so forth. That would all be shaken out during the budget process. But let's assume that, and it's an assumption, that the board could potentially balance a budget at 4%. What this referendum exception could do is allow the board to have a capital projects line item transfer of $933,000. So what that does in this year, you're transferring that, or next year, excuse me, transferring that money to bolster your capital projects fund. In addition, what you're doing is you're taking the millage of the new money, the different additional it's less than 1.66, but whatever 933,000 of that 1.66, it's like 0.8 something, and you're building that into your total millage. So what that will help you do futuristically is that if you need to borrow more money for a larger project, you already have that millage in your budget. So in that year, you would not do a capital projects transfer, but you would already have that into your debt service line built in already to reduce the millage impact for a larger borrowing, if that makes sense.
A couple of the questions. So on your Act 1 index historically, can you just refresh our memories that beyond this year's Act 1 index of 4, that the projected Act 1 indices are going to be even lower?
Act 1, yes.
And then,
very, very good point, Dr. Lee. The projections that were released in November have next year at 4%, the year after, and I'm going off memory, 3.6%, 3.3%, down to I think 3.1%. I think they've only projected 3 more years beyond next year. That's kind of what we're seeing industry-wide. We saw a very large uptick, 5.3 in 24-25 was historically the highest Act 1 index in the since they've been using that as a measurement since 2006. So yes, the ability for school districts to raise new money potentially is going to be going down based on the IFO's projections.
And then historically in 17, 18, 18, 19, what were the referendum exceptions that we were applied for? Were there
They were special education, yeah. I think in 17, 18, it may have been a little bit of a retirement, but in both cases, it was special education.
But they were minor. I mean,
Yes.
we're talking about a 50% increase from the Act 1 to the proposed.
Up to. You
Yeah,
don't
no.
have, I mean.
No, I
you
understand,
could-
but my concern is that once you open that door, you find something to use it for. So if I'm understanding this correctly, this is really, we're using special ed as a reason to go to referendum, but it's really for the facilities study that we did and the data that we got back and the projected repairs that we think we may need down the road.
That is giving the board the option to do that.
But that's what this is, right? This
Yes.
really has nothing to do with special ed. We're just using that as the reason to go to referendum, because it's only one of the four you can do.
Yeah, yes and no. But the the reason we're eligible for this is because of an over expenditure. So the over expenditure was in special ed. We're seeing this as an opportunity for other areas, but we did overspend. So that isn't. It's not a funny number, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I'm very concerned with going that high with a tax increase. Again, I don't.
What I'm showing there is the maximum.
What is, I understand, what is our capital fund balance at right now, roughly? I know you probably know to the penny.
No, actually, I don't know it to the penny. So in the capital projects fund, we're about 2.8 million. Remember, we just got a purchase order for the final part of the middle school now roof.
Mm-hmm.
We're asking for, down in the agenda, some tennis court items. What the wild card is how much money is going to be left from the last bond issue. We still have monies to pay, as we showed in our previous presentation. I'm projecting that we'll probably have between $750,000 and $1 million left over that will be put into the capital projects fund to help address some of those immediate needs. In addition, we have talked to ICS, and they're going to come back with a priorities list to match against our available funds to say, okay, what are some of the things that we can start ticking off that large list that we can address systematically and financially right away. And then, again, working with our financial advisors, matching against the report, looking longer term, because as you know, some of those other ones are not going to be able to be addressed through
It'll be
capital
borrowing.
projects.
It'll be a borrowing, yeah.
It'll be a bond issue.
Yeah.
And again, hoping that Governor Shapiro will again open up a facilities improvement grant. I think we have some new strategies on how we hopefully will be able to garner some of those funds in next year, but again, we'll have to wait to see if it's included in next year's budget.
And is there a limit, refresh my memory, which fund, is there a limit as to how high it could go?
General fund is, the fund balance is 8% of your
Budget?
8% of expenditures. You cannot, your unreserved fund balance cannot exceed 8% of your budgeted expenditures. Now, as you recall, we have some funds that are reserved or committed for PSERS, for healthcare. We're using the last one of debt this year for that phase-in of debt. So those do not count. Our unreserved at this point, as of year-end 6/30/24, was, I believe, 3% ballpark of unreserved. Now, you combine everything, we were about at 7%. And I can get those figures to the board exactly.
Please, yeah.
Yep.
Not just percentages, actual dollar
Yeah,
amounts in
yeah,
each one.
yeah, I
Yes.
have it on the sheet, yep.
Yeah.
Just to go back to that transportation increase, it was about 1.3 million that we were not expecting.
Correct. Correct.
And it gives us a little bit of flexibility should that occur again.
I'm hoping against hope it's not occurring again. This also, again,
Or something like it.
something like that. And again, so what was it? I think it was last meeting. Because of case numbers, we had to add a special education teacher in this year's budget. I'm already starting next year's budget having to account for a teacher that we've already hired. So those are some of the difficulties, especially when we're growing. When we were using these indices or these exceptions, we were definitely growing. We've leveled off. Do I foresee that potential increasing again? Perhaps. Again, we're still at the mercy of development at the township level. But again, the difficulty with budgeting under Act 1 is we have to do things and make so many decisions 5, 6, even 7 months ahead of time. That's the difficulty in this process.
The transportation expenses, were they all special ed related? None of it had to do with running 4 buildings?
No, because we were not running 4 buildings in 23, 24. This was running 3 buildings. This was special education.
And if we're going to try to consistently put a line item in our budget for these facility repairs, and the Act 1 index is projected to be lower the next couple of years, would it be safe to assume that it looks like we'll be asking for exceptions if we can every year to try to keep consistently growing that?
I don't know if you would qualify for them in every year. What is, if, again, using the numbers that I projected, if that number is in your budget, and for whatever reason you can't meet the Act 1 index and you don't qualify for exceptions, instead of transferring $900,000, you transfer $600,000. You have that $300,000 to account for this because you've already built in the millage. That is a way of strategically addressing those types of concerns. I'm not advocating one way or the other. I'm just presenting an option to the board. Would I have been presenting this option if we didn't hear of the needs of the district? Probably not. But that's something that needs to be planned for. And if you heard the folks from ICS in our meetings with them, they're used to having districts already having a line item in their budget dedicated for that, and B, having that number be $500,000, $750,000, something robust. We need to,
Yeah, well, that's not us.
I understand that. I understand.
So that's my concern, is that they have expensive taste, and we don't have that budget for them.
Understood. Yeah. And as you recall, we were not planning to have the 4th building. The 14% or 14+% increase while building the high school changed a lot of things that we had to do.
And yet we were still able to come in well under Act 1.
Correct.
And man that building. Yeah.
Correct.
Kudos to you.
It wasn't to me. It was all of, it's all the decision makers.
I was going to say something about that. Yeah. Oh, no, what I was going to say is my concern in the bigger picture is similar to what we experienced over COVID. We raised taxes, and we've been raising taxes. We raised them, about 16% over 4 years. And if we continue to raise them, we start taxing a lot of our seniors out of the district, which then gets replaced with growing families, like COVID did, and then we're chasing our tail. And we're bringing in more and more students, and we just can't play catch up because it's all residential, none of it. So that's my concern is, you have to be very mindful of not taxing our seniors out of this district and then ending up with a much bigger problem.
Absolutely. And historically, Mr. Berardi, Mr. Geiger, Mrs. Baker, longstanding board members, that we've heard, we've talked about that. We know that we're probably, again, with the potential developments that are coming, going to be over 90%. We'll probably be 91, almost 92% residential versus commercial. It's very difficult because we know we're a bedroom community. But we have been extremely cognizant of balancing the needs of the taxpayer with balancing the needs for our students. It's a difficult process.
You know, we've all seen some of those townhouses going up now. Where are we at with seeing any type of revenue from Philmont?
So I've had there was one townhouse that was on my November run sheet. I haven't gotten the December run sheet, of which we were able to garner a transfer tax. I didn't get the assessment run. They didn't update the assessment. I can tell you that overall, notwithstanding those potential increases in assessments, I'm getting hit with tax assessment appeals of residential homes that are going, my total assessment has been dropping. So all things equal, if nothing else was happening, my total district assessment this upcoming year, if nothing else was happening, would probably be lower than where I started at.
Are you seeing those appeals on existing homes or
Yep.
some of the new developments that went up?
Existing homes.
Like older homes, 10, 15, 20 years old?
5, 10, it doesn't matter. So typically, what happens with assessment appeals is there's a few law firms that kind of market themselves, and they go door to door.
Yeah.
And the county, who is in charge of these, have just been granting these appeals. I called our contacts down there to ask for a explanation, and the response I got was, well, you always have the chance to fight those. That's not an explanation, so.
No.
Good questions, thank you.
Mr. Gwen, to your point earlier that the referendum exception provides us essentially a buffer to increase the Act 1 up to a certain percentage, and to Mr. Berardi's concern that going up to 6 would be a 50% increase from the Act 1 of 4. Do you know historically or recall historically from the previous times what those relative size of those cushions were, the exceptions provided, and how much we ended up?
Unfortunately, I did not bring my budget report. Let me see if I can get to the, hold on.
Are you asking what percentage was the?
Yeah, essentially, you're at the potential because, you know, we were very successful, only increased from 2.5 to 2.97, 2.4 to 2.58. I guess I'm trying to get at, is this exception that we're applying for of greater magnitude relative to our Act 1 index to make it appear that 50% increase of?
So in our budget report, and this was a suggestion actually from Mr. Berardi that I included in our budget report. Let me see if I can find it here. Here we are. So, blow this up a little bit. Since the beginning of Act 1, you can tell on the left-hand side, this was the Act 1 base. On the right-hand side was the actual increases. So you can tell early on, and again, these were very heavy enrollment increases that the district applied for exceptions. Back then, the district had some grandfathered debt, as well as retirement increases and special education. If you recall, the retirement rate was going up significantly. It was all the way down to 1.64 in 2002. Right now, it's at 34. So to get from 1.64 to 34, it was going up tremendously. So it depended on the year. To your point, Dr. Lee, of how much the district raised taxes. I have another analysis here. Here we go. These were the exceptions that were approved, and these were the exceptions that were used, and essentially these were the amounts on the far right-hand side of what was left on the table, so to speak. So in this given year, the district did not go for over $700,000 worth of exceptions. And you can see in these numbers, they start dwindling as the retirement rate slowed. You can see right here in 18-19, the retirement exception was only $7,200. again, those rates. But if you could see back here, these were where the rates were just going off the rails, 400,000, 374, 331,000. So those were expenditures that we had absolutely no control over at the time. And we were trying to keep up with the rate that was given to us by the state. So I don't know if that helps.
I mean, it's notable that, the 933 would be the highest that we've applied for, but it's justified by our expenditures that we experienced, right?
When was the last time that to your knowledge, that the district had a line item transfer for capital projects?
Never.
Never. Is it a standard practice in other districts?
In districts that I've been in, one yes, one no.
Okay.
I can tell you when I was hired when I was going through the interview process in 1999, I suggested that as part of my interview process, and I was kind of like, never heard of that. And over the years, we've tried to bring it in. We've brought it in different ways, leftover bond funds, revenues that have exceeded expenditures. That's how we brought that capital projects balance up to where it is now. We have a line item in our budget called budgetary reserve, set at $110,000. That is for unforeseen expenditures that happen within the general fund. That is, we've always had that, and that is a line item that when I got here, I wanted to put in, and we were able to get it in. This is more of a significant commitment, so to speak, to continually fund the capital projects fund, because we know there are items that happen that are going to need more than what can be accomplished within the general fund.
Thank you. Are there, I guess, some sort of scenario play out? Like if, say, we decided to resolve to stay within Act 1 and we're faced with an unforeseen significant capital expense, say one of the HVACs went, what would our options be if the fund was not filled?
So, and I'm gonna tell you a worst case scenario. So, because we do have our buffer, please know that we have a buffer. But what districts in the past have done, that either to get or to balance their budget, to stay within Act 1, or even Act 1 plus exceptions. How do you get from point A to point B? You look very hard at every line item in your budget, and you potentially look to cut.
Mm-hmm.
We have never done that here. We've been strategic in the things that we've been able to do. It's all been about what's best for kids here, and we want to maintain that moving forward.
I appreciate that, I agree, but has the administration done an exercise to play out where cuts might have to come from?
We have in the past.
Yeah, is that something that would be undertaken?
I don't think we're at that.
So
I don't think we're at that point.
Okay.
We're not at that point. But I can tell you some of the things that are not mandated would surprise you. Like kindergarten. It's not mandated. I don't think you would ever get away with it.
Sure.
But what districts have done because of Act 1, there have been districts who've had full-day kindergarten, and they've pulled it back to half-day.
Mm-hmm.
We've prided ourselves, Lower Moreland has prided ourselves to having full-day kindergarten since I've been here, well before it was the going trend. So those are kinds of things that we've heard in the past. I could tell you war stories from the School District of Philadelphia. Guidance is not mandated.
Oh, I'm from Los Angeles, I know. Is there a recommended, sorry, I have a few unrelated questions. Is there a recommended amount or percentage of our total budget that is recommended to have in a capital fund?
There is no standard for that. It's just kind of what the board is comfortable with, A, B, matching it against
needs.
What is your needs moving forward?
And correct me, did we pull from the general fund to balance the budget last year? Or
Yes.
Yes, we did.
About, if you recall, Mr. Gregg, again, I
Mr.
can't call him
Gregg,
by
don't say his last
name. We projected about it was 1,739,000. We actually exceeded that. We were about at 1.9 in the deficit.
And if
It was, go ahead.
Sorry, if we had to pull from that again to balance our budget this year, that would potentially impact our stability and ability to
Operate.
Yep.
Yep. Now, this year, and last year, one of the big things, like this year is $1,530,000 of a debt service payment that goes away. It's a one-year payment, a phase-in. So we're utilizing $1.5 million this year that we don't have to utilize next year because that expenditure drops by
Yeah.
1.5 million.
Okay. I think that's it for now.
This might be completely unrelated, but does it affect our grant applications by not having a capital improvement line item on the
No.
budget? Okay.
Just a few comments. One, obviously, nobody likes to raise taxes, nobody likes to pay taxes, but obviously, we have a obligation to provide the resources that our students need to succeed, as we always have done. And I see this as simply a buffer with a fair degree of uncertainty, given our facilities assessment, our need for our extra building. And we're not saying that we're definitely exceeding Act One. We're not saying we're definitely going to X percentage. We're saying we may have that need, and we're allowing ourselves the opportunity to take advantage of that potential need. And I would trust, as you have successfully done for many years, that you would continue to work on a budget that was the most efficient and continuing to assess the needs of all the taxpayers while still meeting the needs of all students.
Wow, Dr. Butler's going to be my press agent. Thank you. Yes, you very articulately said that. And I said that, and I do want to reiterate, and it was right here under the note. The district does not have to use the exception, even if we're approved for the exception. As we've shown in our history, we were approved for a higher number. The 1 year we didn't use over $700,000. Very different circumstances. I guess the key word is flexibility. It gives us a little bit of flexibility as we go into a pretty uncertain budget year.
I guess my concern is that, I saw the line item for 2019-20 where there was a amount requested and we didn't use any of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But, if somebody says, here's $1,000 just in case you need it, right? I can find something to use that on. So you mentioned that ICS would be prioritizing some of the things in their report. Like, is that just based on their input? Are we going to have input on that? Like,
We have been having input, and before any decisions are made, we will be having the folks from ICS come back out for a workshop presentation on what they're doing and their rationale for that.
okay. And I guess this might be a question for Frank. Like, upcoming as far as special education students who may be leaving the district, do we anticipate that like any transportation funding or like students who are placed outside of school, like are any of those students going to be leaving us in the next year? And I also realize that that could be offset by another student coming in that's unexpected.
No major changes in the next year. The students that will be leaving will be students that will be age 22. The cost impact is minimal. It's transition activities, supported work placements. But none of our, what you would call, kind of like a big ticket item of students being transported to out-of-district placements would be leaving in the next year.
And then, I don't know if you know this yet or if it's too soon, like what would, I guess what does that look like from a taxpayer level, if you're looking at like a 4% increase versus a 6% increase? Like,
Off the top of my head, I don't have that versus our average assessment. I can certainly get that for the.
I mean, I think, yeah.
Yeah. And again, that would be part of our scenarios that we present to the board. If that is the route we would go, what I would envision is, okay, we can balance the budget with this, hopefully. Now, here's the board. If we're here, this is what it happens. This is what it could increase by. If we put the line item here, giving kind of a graduated scale of, it's almost a tolerance level, for lack of a better phrase, of what we feel is amenable versus our needs of the district. And again, it's not a good thing, but the positive thing is if you get it in there, then it's easier to build in subsequent years. Just say that. And to answer your question about students leaving, my history here, invariably, as soon as a student leaves, it's uncanny how much that happens. It really is.
Yeah.
I can tell you 2 years ago, we had a student, kindergarten student, one of our highest tickets right now. So 20, let me see, how many years, Frank?
22.
13, 14, 15, potential 15 years worth. You just never know.
Thank you.
Again, no decision is needed tonight. We will present the resolution to stay within Act 1, and that will be our only motion. So that would be a determination. That'll give us direction moving forward. If no one else had any questions, thank you. I know we've gone too long tonight, so I apologize.
Thank you, Mr. McGuinn. I'll take us to item 4, personnel. Ms. Galdo, can you take us through item A, personal motions 1A?
Certainly. So we have recommending Kaylee Eppel as a substitute nurse for the district. And Kyle Loderoy, he's been recommended for the Advanced Placement Coordinator stipend for the year. And then we have several retirements, resignations, and leaves. And then Seth Barron is being recommended as a mentor for the Amanda Cooper Smith, the chemistry teacher at the high school.
Thank you. Are there any comments or questions? If not, let's move to item, it's labeled C on the agenda, Administrative Assistant Business Operations Job Description.
Yes, we are proposing to expand the current job description for the administrative assistant in the business office. We're recommending to include some transportation functions that aren't currently in the job description. And these are, mainly to handle the frontline, field trip requests, the parental concerns, phone calls that come into the office that are now handled by Mr. Marco McGuinn and the assistant business manager. So we're proposing a change to this job description as we go to fill the new position.
Any comments or questions?
I have a quick question. Is there currently an administrative assistant, or just you and the assistant business manager?
The current position is labeled Administrative Assistant Purchasing, so it's an expansion of job duties, and it's also projecting forward, trying to take some of the duties off the business manager position, kind of spreading it out just a bit.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. And item D is a renewal of our CareBridge Corporation, the Employee Assistance Program. So we've had CareBridge as our employee assistance provider for several years now, and we've been happy with the services they offer to our staff as far as free counseling visits and crisis counseling services and supervisory assistance. So we're recommending a renewal. This would be a 3-year agreement from March 1st, 25 to February 29th, 28. And there is a slight increase in the price.
Thank you. Are there any comments or questions for Ms. Galdo on this item? Thank you. If not, we'll move on to curriculum, professional meetings. Is that Mr. Cole? Thanks.
Yep, and it's a light one this month. So there are only two currently. One is for me to attend the National Association of School Resource Officers Crime Prevention through Environmental Design course. And the real, as thrilling as that sounds, the value add to this would fulfill the requirements for me to become a certified school environmental auditor. As you recall, we do those every 3 years. They take quite a bit of time to get scheduled, and they're very challenging to schedule. The state does offer free audits, but you need to be on that list years in advance. So this would give us the capacity to be able to do those in-house, which would be really nice and helps a lot with grant applications to have a current audit in-house. So small investment for hopefully a big return. And then Julie Dunphy, who's one of our instructional coaches, will be attending a session at the IU on using science investigation to motivate students to read, write, and engage in discourse. That's being hosted by Brett Molding. He's been a real asset to us as we've prepared for STEEL standards. So that's going to be a great session for her.
Thank you, Mr. Cole. Any comments or questions? We'll move on to item 7, buildings and grounds. It looks like we have an application for use for LMPTA movie night.
Yeah, just the Lower Moreland PTA for the request of the middle school for the movie night. The planning to use the auditorium
Thank you.
at no charge.
Any comments or questions?
Yes, this is for all students across all 4 schools.
Yes, all who want to attend.
And any amount of guests with them?
I don't know the specifics of how the PTA is going to be planning on doing this, and I don't know exactly what movie they're going to be playing, to be honest with you. So.
Okay, I didn't know if there was a capacity issue at all.
The auditorium's capacity is 1,200.
Thank you. We'll move on to business finance. Mr. McGuinn, items A through E.
Yes, we have accounts payable checklist dated 11/26 in the amount shown. Item B, this was shared in a board report. We have a proposal from Path Pro Services to do some extensive repairs and rejuvenation of our middle school tennis courts. And this expenditure would come out of the Capital Projects Fund, if so approved. Item C is budget transfers for our technology equipment leases. These are for our 3 and 4 year lease payments that are budgeted under technology equipment, but when we pay them out of different lines between principal and interest, and it's taking those funds out of one line and adding it into those principal and interest lines. And then item D is a request of an extension of an agreement with the Barksdale Group that provide photography services for the school district. This firm provides photography services for all of our schools. We've had them since 2016. I polled the building administrators. They're pleased with the products that they get. And again, this is a zero cost service to the district. There are some value added items that the district gets with each year. They get a class photo for free. They get some banners if they want. So that we've had a very good relationship with Barksdale over the years. And then the last item I have tonight is approval to extend our agreement with ATI Physical Therapy for a 3-year period shown. The projected increases are 3%. Before ATI, so 4 years ago, and in the past, we had an agreement with Holy Redeemer to provide athletic training services. Holy Redeemer has gone out of the business of providing athletic trainers. ATI stepped up and provided us with saved our bacon, so to speak. We've had a very good relationship with ATI over the 3 years in speaking with Mr. Dominic. We've had a great trainer on site, and when that trainer cannot make it, they do provide substitute services. This is essentially the cost of the going cost for for athletic trainers to provide the services we need for all of our athletes, student athletes, for both practices and for games.
Thank you, Mr. McGuinn. Are there comments or questions from the board on items 8A through E?
Mark, on the tennis courts, when's the last time we had them resurfaced?
Sorry. The tennis courts were completely renovated, I guess you would say, brought down, and we actually added a court so we went from 6 to 7 in 2012. So we did some repairs a year and a half ago to get us through. Those repairs didn't hold, and in fact, we brought the group back out, and the guy was kind of scratching his head, said, "Wow, we didn't really do a good job." I'm like, "No, you didn't." So we asked for a proposal from that group as well as this group, and we're pleased that we could potentially extend the life. Honestly, having tennis courts that are already 12 years old is probably beyond toward the end of a useful life. 10 to 12 years is usually the life cycle of that. If we can extend it another 5 to 7 years, that would work well for us. And again, we maintain it very well. We keep it, as clean as possible, get the leaves off of it, make sure that everything is properly maintained and addressed as it comes up. So long answer to your question, sorry.
And you're recommending the first option, that right way, or
Correct.
Path Pro which is resurfacing all courts, not just filling in cracks.
Yes, whatever. It's how they laid out their, yes, and that also gives you that. I believe it was a 2-year guarantee, but then they had indicated that they've seen in their experience that those courts, again, 5 to 7 years of extended useful life.
Okay. We're not using the tennis courts for anything but tennis, right? There's no
pickleball, Mr. Geiger. just tennis.
I meant the rockets, firing rockets, science class, nothing like that, where we're damaging the courts unnecessarily.
No, and these courts, I will say that the courts do get good community public use in the summer. Obviously, we get priority during the school year, but we want to make sure that they're in good condition for our community as well.
Thank you.
Mark, did we, I remember we had a conversation with Jamie Lynch about possibly some of the damage was caused by some of the construction. Did we clarify that?
We did, and it was not. The cracks that were shown were not indicative of where they thought any damage would have occurred. Right. It was actually coming from the Buck Road side, which had nothing to do with the construction.
Okay, thank you.
And that actually was from the first firm that came out and saw it and said, yeah, it's definitely coming down that way.
To be clear, the person that you're suggesting is not the one that came out and said we didn't do a good job.
That is correct, Dr. Butler. That person did provide a quote for higher price and less linear feet of repair.
Thanks. Any other questions for Mr. McGuinn? All right, thank you. We'll move to agenda item 11, school board. We'll take item A, the district calendars for 2025, 26, and 26. There's a typo there. And 26, 27. Is there anyone that will comment on that?
I have a question. In 25, 26, we're off on February 17th for a holiday. The 16th, I guess, is President's Day. The 17th is, we're not off the following day, the next year. So I was just wondering about that. Oh. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions on item A? So we'll take item B and C. These are two trips. First, an out-of-state trip for the class of 2026 to Six Flags, and then an overnight trip for girls basketball to Wildwood, New Jersey for a tournament. Any comments or questions?
The basketball trip is for this December, right? It says 12/22, 12/23 of 24.
I have a question about the field trip to Six Flags. I mean, is this going to be student, parent funded? That's the students that pay are the ones that go. This is how it's going to be funded. Okay. Any, I mean, so they're projecting 120 to 150. The entire class is going to be invited. Let's say there's 220. They're just anticipating not everyone's going to say yes.
Yeah, not everyone likes roller coasters.
I get it. I get it. What about people who want to go but can't afford to go? Families that go, is there any consideration, you know?
And anybody who wants to go will go.
Will go?
Yeah.
Okay. And how will that happen?
So
If I can't afford a trip, a payment, how will my child be able to go?
the way we do that is case by case. So
Okay.
we need people to let us know. Typically, it's families who receive free or reduced lunch.
Right.
Similar to a discount on an AP test that we would give, or a fully funded AP test.
Okay.
So it's done with discretion, either through the counselor or the assistant principal or the principal.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions on the two trips? If not, we'll move to item D. This is the Eastern 2025-26 General Operating Budget. This will be a resolution that will need to be passed at the next legislative meeting.
I have a question maybe for Mr. McGuinn. We're tied to Act 1. Are they tied to any kind of formula or?
They typically have been, they're tied, I don't think it's, to my knowledge, they're not specifically tied, but they have proactively indicated that they would stay within Act 1, and they've consistently been well under Act 1. Again, our contribution is twofold. It's the tuition costs as well as their 10-year capital plan, so they've done that by school district. Our costs are going up slightly, and that's more of an indication of 3-year rolling average of our students going up.
Thank you.
Any other questions on item D? If not, we'll take items E through Z. These are all second readings of the listed policies. Second readings, and thank you very much for the attached cover memos that explain the changes for us and for the public. Any comments or questions? If not, is there any correspondence?
There is none.
Any items for discussion? Any public comment?
There's nobody signed up for public comment.
If not, if there are no objections, I will move to adjourn until our next meeting on December 17th at 7 p.m. As there are no objections, the meeting